Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to Informatics 1B. This is your first tutorial. Well, for those that didn't attend this morning, this would be your first tutorial. Otherwise, this would be your second tutorial. As Mr. Cottrell said this morning, how we will handle the tutorials is we'll basically have a Tuesday morning session, which Mr. Cottrell will do. We'll have a Tuesday evening session, which I will do. We'll cover the same topic in both of these tutorials. One presented in Mr. Cottrell's style and one presented in my style, as we do code differently as well, and we do approach things differently, but the ultimate or the final solution will be the same thing. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat at any time. I will get to them as soon as I can. I'll most likely cover a topic and then go to the questions, unless it's something that's important based on what I'm doing right now. Otherwise, if Mr. Cottrell's in the session, he will normally also answer the questions if I don't get to it before he does. All right. But like I said, if you have any questions, please drop them in chat whenever you want to or whenever you can. And don't be afraid to ask anything. There's no stupid questions. There's only good questions. Believe me, if you have a question, there's probably someone else that has the same question, but that might be too afraid to ask. So if you have something you want to ask, go for it. Let's keep it relevant to the work while we are presenting, but before and after we can go more on a tangent, I guess. But we'll focus on the work for now. So in today's tutorial, what we're going to be discussing is a revision of Informatics 1A. And the best way to do that is to cover one of the past papers that you have written. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this would have been your second semester test. I'm not sure if it was your main paper or the SSA paper. So you should be fairly familiar with this problem. That will also maybe help just get you into that jump start you might need for Informatics 1B. So let's go through the short intro, look at all the questions, and then jump into Visual Studios. So the question reads as follows. The South African Department of Health needs to know how best to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak in the country. Recognizing that information technology can greatly streamline their current process of paper records, they have approached you to design and develop a Visual Basics application that will help them to crunch numbers and guide their decision making. The idea is that if a program is good enough, it can be used for other countries as well. And then there's a small note that says, note that any decimal values that are to be displayed must be shown for exactly 2 decimal places, and an example is provided. So they're already giving you a format standard that they would like you to use, and a short intro just stating the purpose of the program. Now, if we look at the question, the application must be able to store the information or the following information for each province in the country. So we already know, stating for each province, that we'll have more than one province. So we can already identify that we will have an array of provinces. So the following information is relevant towards a single province, so we can already see an outline of a structure that we'll have to create. And the structure itself is the province name, the total population in millions, which means that it's represented by a double. Now, currently it's showing you 14.459 as an example, which shows you that they're using a shorter format for millions. So if we want to do any calculations, we'll have to convert that into the actual number and not just the representation here. And then in information for each metropolitan area in the province, so we can already see once again each metropolitan showing that we have an array of metropolitans here. We'll need to store the name of the metropolitan area, the number of COVID-19 cases per day, so showing us that we have an array for days as well, and a total positive cases. So showing us we'll have a total calculation here. Then we also have an index of worst metropolitan area and a lockdown level, which is identified by question 4, 5, and 7. Now, going through the questions quickly, what we can see is the solution must be able to handle any number of provinces, any number of metropolitan areas per province, and any number of days monitored in the metropolitan area. So once again, we can see an array of provinces, an array of metropolitans, and a number of days, so an array of days or an array of cases per day. So these numbers are to be specified by the user, showing us that we need to initialize before we can read in data. For the purpose of this assessment, you may assume that each province has the same number of metropolitan areas, while each metropolitan area has, I'm assuming that's being monitored for the same number of days. We'll just correct that typo. So the metropolitan areas will be monitored for the same number of days, and each province will have the same number of metropolitan areas, making it easier for us to manage our data structure. So we know we only have the one value for all of the arrays, or for each unique array, I should say, rather. Then our next question is the user must be able to input the necessary data into the program. So we've got our initialization, we've got our input, and then for each metropolitan area in each province, calculate, store, and display the total number of COVID-19 positive cases that have been recorded over all the days. So we have a total calculation that we'll do within each metropolitan. Then our next question, for each province, calculate and store the index of the metropolitan area that had the highest number or the highest total number of COVID-19 positive cases. Use this index to display the name of the metropolitan area for each province that had the highest total number of COVID-19 positive cases. So I'll get you a question now. I'm just going to read all these out quickly. Then we've got our next question. So define a subroutine called div by d, so divide by d, which accepts two parameters, a double parameter called divisor and an integer parameter called dividend or dividend, sorry. And the subroutine must return dividend divided by divisor. So just a small subroutine for us. And then the next question is for each province, calculate, store, and display the province's lockdown level. This is calculated by looking into the ratio between the province's population and the total number of COVID-19 positive cases for the worst metropolitan area in that province. Remember that the record structure currently stores the province population field as a number in millions. The example data's population are 14.459 in millions is actually 14,459,000. So they're just showing you that with the kind of like the unit they're using to display, you'll have to convert it into the actual number before you can determine what the lockdown level will be. And then there's a small table down here that just gives us the ratio values and then what the lockdown level would be for those ratio values. All right. And then I think our last question is calculate and display the overall average lockdown level of all the provinces. This average should be displayed in a text box, keeping in mind that we need to use a text box there. All right. So first things first is you'll have to create a design. Now, we know, I mean, over the years, we've seen this happening. We were students once ourselves. We know you're most likely going to code this out before even considering doing a design. Now, for these small programs, it's kind of fine. You can still do that. I would highly recommend doing a design beforehand. You don't have to worry too much about the pseudocode, but just the general design of your layout, your variables, the inputs and the outputs can actually help you a lot to go through this program. But like I said, we know by now most of you probably won't even do that. So having assumed you've done your design, let's start with our program. So let's just open up our Visual Studios. We'll create a new project. No, that's not the one I want. Visual Basics. Visual Basics. Where are you? Window or projects, and we want a. Where are you? There we go. Windows Form application. And then we will call this tutorial 01. All right. Oh, there was a question. Let me quickly get to that question. I don't see the question here anymore. All right. I'm not gonna name your name. You'll know who you are. But if you're having troubles with Eve, just email me that. I can probably just reset your password to the original template. That should solve your problem. Good evening, Miss Cottrell. Yes, they are very quiet in chat. I don't know why. I hope I'm not scaring them already. But we'll see what happens. All right. So first thing first, you know by now you need to rename everything that you have on your form. We are listening attentively. That is good. But you can listen attentively and contribute as well. All right. So I'm going to call my form FRM COVID. And now, having assumed that you've done your design, you should be able to tell me how many buttons you will need and how many text boxes and how many grids you will need. So let's start off with our text boxes. How many text boxes do you think we'll need for this program? One person says three, one text box. Daring. One text box. Okay, so the people saying one text box, why only one text box? All right, let's see. What did you say? All right, but what are you going to use that one text box for? To display the last question. All right, so you're going to be using input boxes. I don't have a problem with that. I actually prefer using text boxes, I mean input boxes, especially if it's going to be a once-off used item. So what I am going to do is I will code it out in terms of using input boxes instead of using text boxes. One thing to keep in mind, always look at your mark sheet. The mark sheet will tell you what you're allowed to do or not to do. Generally, we will put it in the questions as well, as we did with the last question, where it said the last question, the average should be displayed in the text box. But with the input, you'll notice the input doesn't tell you over here that you should use text boxes. So if you want to use text boxes, you can. If you want to use input boxes, you can. And I personally prefer the input boxes. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to initialize. So to initialize, we know we're going to have to set up all our variables. Rename everything. Right, and you can tell me how many buttons we'll need. Any ideas? You can tell me, how many buttons will we need? Everybody looking at the memo now? What? No answers. Anyone that's willing to guess? 5. So let's look at it. Let's look at what we need to do. So we need to initialize. So that would be one button. We need to read in all the information. That would be a second button. We need to calculate and display, or calculate, store, and display the metropolitan, or the total. I'll get to that order question now. So we need to calculate total. So that's a third button. We need to calculate the highest total of COVID cases. That would be our fourth button. Then we have a calculate the lockdown. That would be our fifth button. And then lastly, we've got calculate the display, the overall average lockdown level. And that would be a sixth button, or our sixth button. So overall, we will need 6 buttons. Right. You just get the order here. For the design, if you say does the order matter, are you referring to the order of the design or the order of the topics in the design? Can you just maybe elaborate on that question? Total, we've got highest. Generally, it doesn't matter in which order you put them. I sometimes swap them around because I can't remember the order which we normally use. But in terms of approaching the problem, the first thing you need to do is you need to consider what's going to be the input of the program and what's going to be the output of the program. So that would generally be the first two to start with. Once you know what the input will be and once you know what the output would be, you can kind of determine how many variables you'll need. So that will give you an idea of how many variables you might need inside your design or inside your program. Once you've determined how many variables you'll need, you can kind of determine what the interface will look like. So you can already start thinking about what that interface would look like. After that, once you have the interface, so you know what the buttons are, you know what the layout's going to be, text boxes, input boxes, whatever you're going to need, you can consider what your pseudocode will look like. Because now that you know what you're going to be using to input and display the information, you can kind of tie your pseudocode to your variables in terms of information going in and information going out. And after that, you can provide us with a test data table to show us what information you use to test your applications. Order itself, I wouldn't say it matters that much as long as you have each topic there. But the order, it's not that important. But then again, there is a logical way in which you would approach solving the problem, and it depends on how you approach that. So to answer your question, it doesn't really matter that much as long as you have each topic there. All right. I fell off track here. So index, and then we've got our lockdown levels. Uh, I am not the best person for naming buttons, as you can see. And then lastly, what was our last one? The overall lockdown? Right. So we've got our grid, we've got our buttons down, we've got our label. That is a bad name for the label, by the way. I am aware of that. It would be our average, so let's maybe put that at the bottom. Just move everything up so that it looks nice and clean. My spelling is horrible today. All right, so there we have our form set up. Nice, simple, and easy. So let's start with our code. So if we go to our coding part, very first thing we need to do is we need to add our 3 lines, which will be absolutely crucial. So option strict, we want to put that on. Option explicit, we want to put that on. And option fur, we want to put that off. Now, as discussed this morning, with option infer, option infer is one of those things that are kind of new to Visual Studios. It came in a few years ago, but you can put that on and off. By default, it is on when you install the application. You can put it off if you want that to be the default. The idea here is that when you code out your application, when you don't provide it a data type, if option infer is on, what it does, it will try and infer or try and convert at runtime that value into an applicable data type. The problem there is you can't control what the data type will be when coding. So you want to make sure that whatever you're using, you can guarantee what the data will be. And option infer enforces that, the fact that you need to provide a data type for all of your data sets. So once we've added our 3 important lines, we can now start with our application. And if we go to our document, we have the outline of our structures. The first thing we want to do is we want to start with our variables. We want to create each one of these, starting with our structure. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my structure. And our first structure is the metros. Any information we have regarding the metros. So the first thing we wanted was the metropolitan name. Sorry, I'm just going to move my microphone here. I'm not used to the setup at the moment. Then we have the cases per day for the metropolitan. So in this case, we know that's going to be an array because we are monitoring this over a number of days, and this is being stored as an integer. And then we have our total cases, which is a value that we will have to calculate. So that's our first structure. Then we have our private structure for our metro provinces. For our province, singular. And each province needs to store the name of the province, the population of the province, It's being stored as a double. So this double essentially is a shortened version. It's the unit, the measuring unit is per million. So it's something we'll have to convert later on once we want to use the actual value. We also want to determine the worst metropolitan, and this will be the index, so integer, and then as well as the lockdown level, which we will be calculating, the lock level. Not interaction, integer. So if everything is, I'm missing something here. Let's just look at that. We are missing, missing the most important one here. I'm missing the metropolitans. So you want to make sure that we have the information about metros. Right. So having an array of our struct inside our struct. And then obviously we're keeping track of multiple provinces. So we want to store this information inside an array as well. An array of our province. Right. So we've got our basic structure set up. That is how we want to keep track of all of our information. And now we can start with the information we need for our variables. So how many variables will we need? Who can tell me? What additional variables will we need for this program? Or what are the important variables that we'll need for this program? Who can tell me? 3, yes. Yes, you can have the same variable names in different structures. Keep in mind that when you refer to a structure, you have to call it by the structure name first. So you're going to have to refer to structure dot and then the variable inside that structure. So it's fine if you do that. Number of days, number of metros, and provinces. Yes, so 3 is the correct answer. Because those are our important ones right now. So we've got our number of provinces, our number of metros, and our number of days. And any other variables that we want to be concerned about right now? Okay. Local variables. So the rest we can use as local variables, yes. So these are the main variables that we are concerned about right now. If there's anything more, we can always come back to it, but for the time being is we'll stick to those 3, which is the number of provinces, the number of metros, and the number of days that we will need. So to start off our program, we start at the very beginning, our initialization, and we start by initializing all of our structures. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find out how many provinces we will be using. So we use an input box for that. And we start with a prompt string. Let's see, number of provinces. And do we want to give a title? Let's just say we can probably just say the same thing there. Okay, that's all we need in that instance. Remembering to convert at our brackets. Then we have our number of metros, which will do the exact same thing. Box and our number of days. All right, so we've got the number of days, and the number of metros. So now, using that information, we can set up our array dimensions. So the first thing we need to set up is we need to set up the provinces. So we read them our provinces to the end provinces, initializing the first step. Now, the next one is inside this array. So we have initialized our array of provinces, which is this one. And now we want to initialize our array of metros, which is inside provinces. And after that, initialize our cases per day. So initializing that number of days we have. So we start with our for loop. So for, I guess we can just use our P. So for P, for the provinces, so for each province, we want to start with the first province, and then we want to go to the last province. And for each province, we just read them our metros inside the province. So taking our provinces, giving it P, and then just looking at our metros and resizing that with the number of metros we have. And once we have that, for each metro, we want to do the same thing where we initialize them, making sure that we set the array dimensions, that we don't make any issues there. So read them, provinces, metros, and then finally our cases, which will be number of days. We're going to declare the local variables P and N. All right, so the method that I'm using is technically I am declaring them. I'm declaring them as I use them. So instead of having them at the very top, so I'm assuming you are used to doing the following. You would probably go, not private, yes. You're probably used to doing the following. So P, M, and probably days as integer. I'm assuming you're used to doing that. I'm just saying D for days because we'll probably use days later on in this initialization process. All right, so instead of doing that, so instead of putting that at the very top, what I prefer doing is I initialize them inside the for loop itself, because that's the only place where I'm going to use them is inside that for loop. I do that because I normally forget I forget that I've initialized them somewhere, and then I keep on reusing the same variables, and somewhere it messes up with my code. So I just prefer using them inside the for loop, which means that they are created here, and once this for loop ends, it also ends there. So I can keep on using the same value inside multiple for loops if I really want to, as long as it's not within this for loop itself. But if you're used to declaring them before the for loop, you can continue on doing that. Personally, for me, I just like declaring them inside the for loop. I guess it comes from back in the day when I used to code Java, because with Java, I also just declared inside the for loop, and with C++, you also just declare it inside the for loop. So it's a habit of code for me. All right. Now we need to set our grid dimensions, and thinking about that, I did not rename my grid, did I? No, I did not. So grid, we'll call it COVID as well. And we don't have to set a name for that. Glorious. All right, so now we need to decide how are we going to do our layouts. So let's look at our rows, and we determine how are we going to display this. Are we going to display the provinces on the left-hand side going down, so for each row, or at the top going to the end? Now, I'm used to doing averages in a column structure, which means that the provinces would be on the left-hand side, but it doesn't really matter how you do that, as long as you remember how you're going to do that, so that when you label them, you use that same structure. So I'm going to go provinces, and then we add 1 so that we can add the title for each province. And then we've got our columns. That would be the number of metros we have. And then we are also going to need to calculate the total, the highest for each, and the titles. So that would be 3 of them. If you're unsure of whether you have the correct number of columns, the easiest way to kind of determine if you have or have not enough columns, keep it at the base level, so in provinces, initialize everything, and as soon as you start using your input, you'll see that the application crashes. Now, you can keep on increasing this number until it stops crashing. Generally, that will solve your problem, or you can give it a number larger than what is required, and then just see how many additional columns you have, then just remove that. But ideally, you would look at your data structure. It will be the dynamic range, so the value that you are providing the program, or the value the user is providing with you, plus 1 for your title, and plus 1 for every additional information you want to display on the data set. So there's never truly a wrong or a right answer for how many additional ones you have to display. The only situation where it will be wrong is 1, your application crashes, and 2, there are empty spaces that are not labeled or addressed at all. All right. And then for the next thing, we want to initialize our tables. Now, you can either use a subroutine to place the labels, but in this case, because we don't have specific names for each label, I'm just going to do the labeling inside here and not inside a subroutine. So for each province, this is where it comes, where you'll see where my style is slightly different. As I've already used P up there, I have to redeclare P down here because P is initialized there, and then P stops existing after that has been used. Now, if you want to use that value, once that array ends, you'll have to declare it beforehand. But if you're not going to use it outside of that loop, then you can just declare it inside that loop, just as a rule of thumb. Because sometimes you actually do want to use that value at the end, even though you do have that value instead of your maximum. So for each province, we want to display the information. So we're going to place the results. Create that subroutine. So this is what we'll be using to place results inside our grid. So integers, our columns, and our text. And then that would just be our grid. But row is r grid.col equals c, and our grid.text equals t. Right. Then we just want to use that to place all of our results. So in this case, we're going to have our top row, so row 0, and then each column going, no, provinces are on the left side. So it's row P, column 0, we want our provinces placed. This would be province. Yeah. Why is there no by val in front of R, C, and T? All right, so one thing to note, I guess this is Visual Studio is being nice. By default, it's if you use an variable, the variable declaration inside the array or inside the signature over there, it's by default, it is by val. Not having by default is accepted because it is by default there in any case. It's by ref that is important because if you're using it by reference, that is not by default in that manner. So just to kind of simplify that, by val is a default state inside the method signature, and by ref is not. So it kind of tidies up the code and it just essentially your declaration there, because this is by ref in any case. So you don't have to put by I mean it is by val in any case, by value. And by reference will give you an editable value essentially, which you would want to use. Does that make sense? I think I said that a bit extended or too abstractly, I guess. Thank you. I'm assuming that you got the gist from that then. All right. So where we'll be placing our labels, so provinces, then we want one for our metros as well. So we can have for p as integer, number of metros, place results, that would be in row 0, column M. So that's for each number of metro. So we would have metro. I'll get to your question in a second. You should be able to talk as well. I think I enabled your audio if you want to ask the question. That would be your metro. Right. And then lastly, you can have the two additional columns would be your worst metro and the lockdown level. All right, so if we can just get to that question, someone had their hand up. I had a person with their hand up. Did you ask your question? Did I answer your question? I'm not even sure now. Okay, I'm going to assume I answered your question because I'm not seeing any questions pop up now. If you haven't asked it yet, just type it out in the chat, and then we'll get as soon as it pops up. Right. So let's maybe just go and place these last two results, which would be our row 0, and that would be the metro plus 1, and that would be the first one, the worst metropolitan area. Let's just go first metro, and then the last one was we'll see what was the last one in a second. Was the last one? The last one was the lockdown level, of course. All right. So we can run this, see if it works. It's always good to just test out your application, making sure that it works. And I forgot Visual Studio normally takes a while before it starts running. So we can initialize. We've got, let's say we've got 9 provinces. We've got 3 metros for each province, and we can track it for 3 days. We've got our provinces. So we've got our 9 provinces. We've got Metro 1, 2, and 3. Our worst metro and our lockdown. So perfect. All right. If you're going to use test data, you can kind of resize to what your test data will be. It's a nice touch. It wastes less space, I guess. But ultimately, you don't really have to do that as long as you just have a relevant or a decent layout. Not too small, not too large. You know, just the perfect size. You don't want to be too big, but you also don't want to be too small. Right. So once we have initialized, we can now start with reading in our information, which is the next or the most important thing thereafter. Okay. I think here comes the question. So the question is, last semester we had to use by-val. So does this mean we do not need to state by-val in an array unless it is by ref? Yes. So by default, it is by value or by val. So you don't need to state by val. The easiest way for me to show that, let's maybe just do that. If you search for it, let's see. It should be one of the first links, just to kind of show you what it's all about. If you look at the official Microsoft documentation, it will state there that the by val, because it is default, you don't actually have to explicitly state the by val. It reduces noisy code, which means that it is something that is placed inside code that is not necessary. It doesn't have to be there. And it makes the non-default by ref keyword overload when it is needed. So I like using official documentation for our justifications, so you don't have to use by val because by default it is there. Microsoft has placed it there to be the default value. Yes, so basically it is redundant to place val there. And it also makes you overlook what the true meaning is of using by reference. So you don't have to use by val. You only have to specify if it's by ref. That is important. All right. All right. What was I about to do now? I can't remember. Oh, yes. So let's just clear that one out. I think I didn't name it properly. Yes. Where is it now? Okay. So now we want to provide the input for each of them, starting with our province. Right. So for each province, we know that we need to complete the information, and that information starts with the name. And then we'll be using input boxes for that as well. If your input box, first one is province name. Keep in mind that you do want to do this properly when you want to type out the entire sentence that says, please provide the province name. I'm just gonna type out province name just to keep things kind of simple for now. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to type everything out, and that's just gonna waste time. Then our second one is our population, which is a decimal value, so we do need to convert into our double. And this is population. And then after that, it's the metropolitan information. So M is integer. Making sure once again, indicate our province, our metro, and the information for our metro. So firstly, the name of our metropolitan. Guess I should add the province number here as well. Yeah, okay, let's do this. Province, is to make sure that we have the things properly set out here. So many brackets, so many brackets. Okay. So that is just initializing, saying that we want province 1, 2, 3, 4 to whatever name. We want metro 1 to, just so we can keep on track of which one of the 3 metros we are adding, and just the name for that. In first semester, we normally also used and. So is it fine if we still use it informatics 1B? I'm using it, so I don't see an issue if you use it.
Okay. So, sir, can I ask?
Yes, you can ask.
My question is, inside the for loops, we normally use after the argument, the first argument, we normally end it with a question mark. So, so that we can ask another things like for you make to make your code for a reader when the marker marks you, so that they can see that you are it's looping and all that. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but we normally did that.
Okay, so I'm assuming it's basically in the input box message that you're providing the user. You're
Yes,
just completing a complete sentence with the question mark as the sentence would be requesting information from the user.
yes, sir.
Okay, I guess grammatically that would be the correct way of doing that. But like I said, I'm just going to do a shorthand here. You can give it a proper sentence, but ultimately we'll be marking you based on the functionality of your program, not how good your grammar is inside the program itself.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So I'm not too concerned about actual punctuation. Are your dots in the sentence in the right place? Do you end your sentence with a dot or a question mark or an exclamation mark? You won't be marked down on things like that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's see. Where are we? We've got metro name. The metro still needs the number of cases per day. All right. Yes, number of cases per day. Yeah. So I need our for loop for that. That would be our day as integer. I think that's right. Let me just make sure I'm right there. I lost track of where I was. Yes, that's our number of days. So that would be provinces. It's E. Our metros, metro M, and our cases per day for case D equals, that is our number of cases for again, I'm just keeping it simple. Obviously, you'll probably give it the province, the number of cases for province X, metro Y, day 1. But I'm just trying to keep it simple because otherwise I'll just be wasting time typing it all out properly. All right, so that should complete our input. Let's just make sure we've got everything there. We've got province name, province population, we've got metro name, number of cases per day in the metros. So all of that should be done. Now, you can provide a comment that you're finished with all of the input. Generally, if you don't have any questions being asked after that, it means you are done. But you can just assume once it's all been read in that you'll have to display it in any case, which means it is done. But now we need to display it. So the question is, do we display it while we receive the input, or do we have a special button to display all the information? What do you guys think? Should we have a special button to display everything, or should we display directly after we captured it? Any comments? Any ideas? No need for special buttons, so you display after capturing. Rather display after capturing. I think that is good. So once you have captured the information, you can display it. So the easiest way to do that is simply just directly after you've captured it there, you can just kind of place your results, and that is placing your results in. We need to make a mess of here now. Provinces are rows, so we've got row P. I need to make a mistake now. No, I'm not. That is row, that is column, and that is our name. And then we can do the same for place our population, and that will place our population for P. We don't actually display the population information. If you think about it, you don't actually display that information. You only use it inside your calculation. And then the metros, we can do that as well. So place your results. That would be row 0, column M, and then the metro. Right. Keep in mind, doing this, if you're going to do that, it overrides placing your results. So over here, it overrides those values. So you can either override those values with the names, or you don't have to at all. So just keep that in mind. And then if we look at this, this is one thing we are actively tracking, and this is the fact that we have our province. So the rows represent our provinces, the metro represents our metro, our columns represents our metros, and the text is the number of days we have. And this is the information we just input. So this is the information that we have or deem very important. Just to make sure that everything is okay here, there seems to be a mistake. There's results. That's fine, that's fine. It has an issue with this one. Oh, because we need to convert it to a string. Of course. Of course, of course. There we go. No issues there. So let's make sure this works properly. You just run this and see if it works. Once again, it's up to you if you want to override it with the province names. It's not something, unless we ask you to do that, it's not something we're going to give you marks for, but it depends on what the question is like. So let's keep it simple. Let's say 3 provinces, 3 metros tracking for 3 days. So that's still fine. So we've got our province 1, province 2, province 3, metro 1, metro 2, metro 3. And then worst metro, and then lockdown level. Now, in this case, we don't have names for them yet. So let's read in information. So we've got province. So let's say we'll take this as a thing. Population will be 12, and then the metro name will, let's say, there is our first mistake. Let's see, what did we do wrong here? Conversion from string number of cases per day 1. Conversion from string. Stupid error. I never actually gave it an input box. Small things, you see, small things. When you test them, you'll see your mistakes. All right, there was a question. Let's quickly get to this question. If we already labeled our provinces in a for loop in line 29, not unnecessary, or could we just leave out our for loop for provinces? I'm assuming, so you're referring to this one. We did place the labels already, but these labels are generic labels. These are not labels specifically referring to the actual structure. So we want to place the actual names that we'll be using inside our labels. So let's just quickly go and test that out again. 3 provinces, 3 metros, 3 days. We've got our Prov 1, 12 mil. We've got M1, then day 1, 12, day 2, 12, day 3, 12. We've got metro 2. That would give us our 2. We've got issues. M3. Right. So you see, it's already important that we test it here because we have a mistake here. This needs to count, which means this needs to count. So we are tracking this for province 1, metro. Oh, we're actually tracking the totals here. You see, this is why it's important to test and make sure you track everything. So this is actually not true because we are only displaying the totals inside each one of our metros. So the only thing we actually placed here is the metro name and the province name. See, this is where design becomes important, because if I did a design beforehand, I would know exactly what is going inside my grid and what is being displayed, instead of trying to figure it out on the fly. All right. Okay, so we've inputted we captured our data. That was important. We have initialized our information after we've captured our data, and we now want to calculate our totals. Now, inside our totals, we need to display the information in any case. So this is where we'll see if everything's working correctly or not. All right. So for this, we want to calculate the totals for each metro, so the total positive cases for each metro, and then after that we'll be calculating the maximum. So this is question 4. For each metropolitan area in each province, calculate, store, and display the total number of COVID-19 positive cases that have been recorded over all the days. So we go to our button and we start by deciding for each feed as integer. For each province, oops, no, what am I doing here? And for each metro, you want to calculate our total. First thing we want to do is we want to initialize. Always remember to initialize before you start with your array. And then for your days, and cap lots. I did it from the back to the front. So you're taking the total, which you've initialized, and you're just adding to that total all 3 of the days. So total equals total plus the day you're tracking for all the number of days you're tracking. So that would give you the total. And then once you have completed all 3 of the days, then you can place your results inside the grid, and that is where you want to place it for your province, your metro, and your total cases. Once again, converting to an integer. You keep on forgetting to convert. Sorry about that. Is an integer. We want to convert to a string. Okay. Yes, we do have a hand. You just paste your question or type your question out. I'll wait for your question before starting with the next part. But I am going to run slightly over time here, so your question?
So my question is, for the for loops,
Yes.
aren't you supposed to include the variable like for the next, like the next e, next m, next?
So you're referring to.
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, so once again, this is now a syntax default. You can add that next, which makes it visually easier to read. So you know that this next refers to the next D. But how the program sees it, the last 4 that it sees is linked to the first next that it sees.
Okay, sir.
So technically, yes, you can add the description afterwards. Let's just make that lowercase. You can add the description afterwards, but ultimately it does not matter because what it's doing is it's linking that for loop to the first next that it sees.
So it's still this. It's still the same as default. In default, it's seeing it as it is.
Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So it's just it's syntactically it looks at the first 4. The last 4 is linked to the first next that it sees. So the first next is linked to that for loop. You can't have that for linked to that next and that for linked to that next. It's impossible.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. But if it makes it easier for you to read the code, then you can add the what for loop you're referring to after the next. But you don't have to. It's just it makes it easier to read sometimes. It's when you start linking 4, 5 for loops within each other, or having nested if statements or for loops within each one of them, it makes it easier to read if you just label it afterwards. But you don't have to, like I said.
Okay, sir. Understood. Thank you.
All right, perfect. All right, so that is now calculating the max. So I'm not going to test it out now, but when you code out your application, you need to test after every single new function that you added, test to see if it runs. It's easier to do that than having to run it at the very end and then having a list of bugs to go and fix. So just run them, see if it works, and then incrementally, continuously test, add, test, add, test, add. You'll have less issues at the end of the day, and you don't have propagating errors going through your code. Right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to calculate the province with the highest or the metro with the highest number of cases, which will be used for our lockdown. So in this case, once again, we go to each province as and then we start with our intro. So I'm hoping you all can still remember how to do a max function. So generally how we start our max functions is we start off assuming that the first value we see is our current maximum. So looking at our current index, which is our worst metro. I see now that I made a typo in the name, but we'll just stay to that. So that is assumed to be our first value. So the first one we encounter, we're assuming is going to be our current maximum. Then we want to create a variable. Now, in this instance, this is the only cases where I prefer putting the max outside, seeing as it is a value that we'll be continuously using. Now, the reason for this is we're going to override this max every single time in any case. If there's an issue, we can just, go and change it. But this I would prefer to have outside. And then in this case, we just want our max to be associated with the actual total cases we have inside our provinces. So, and then our metro, looking at our first metro, and that would be our total cases. So we assume that the first metro has the largest number of cases. So that is metro 1. We assume it currently has the largest number of cases. Then we start with our for loop. This for loop is for our metros. Assuming that we start from number 2, number 1 is already assumed to have the maximum. 2 in metros, and then we test. And what are we testing here? We're testing to see if our current max is smaller than the one we are currently encountering. So provinces, metros, this is now metro M. So in this case, the first one will be the second one, and the total cases. So we want to see if the next one inside the array is larger than the current largest value we have, assuming that the first one is the largest value. So if that one is larger than the previous one, then we need to set a new max, which I'm just going to make. Copy and paste is not your friend, by the way, but I guess to save a bit of time, we're just going to sneak it in there for now. And then we can just have the new maximum set to whatever the current metro is. All right. We've got our end if, and then we can display, once we're done with everything, what the actual name of the province is inside our metro. So for province, so this is now for province P, this is now metro column +1, I think. You'll see now if it's correct or not. And in this one, we just want to display our result. So this will now be the result of the metros. That's provinces. And then we want the maximum value. I'm making a mistake here. Province. Oh, we stored the index. This is why design is important, because then you can't make mistakes like these. Right, so remember, we stored the current index of the maximum value inside our max function, and we're just basically calling that value and then displaying the name of that metro. All right. So let me maybe just recap what we're doing here. So we're starting off by storing the current maximum or assumed maximum index. So that is the first metro is assumed to be the worst metro in this array so far. Then we store the max value, which is the actual total cases value. Then we test the array from the second value, whether that one would be larger than the current maximum. If that one is larger than the current maximum, then we store that index, that m value, as the current largest maximum index inside our worst metro. And then when we display the name, we just pull out that index and then display the name of that specific index. All right. Right, I need to speed up slightly because we are technically over time now. There's only 2 more functions to go, so I'll try and get through them, but still covering the important information. So we have calculated the totals. We have calculated the worst metro. We need to create our subroutine now. So subroutine divide by, which accepts 2 parameters and then returns basically returns the dividend divided by the divisor. So let's go and code that out. Let's just do that at our bottom. So once again, it's just a subroutine we want to do. Just see what we want. 2 parameters, a double parameter called divisor. All right. So we've got private sub, and it was called divide by b, and that would have our dividend as a double. We'll have our divisor. Our local variables visible when the subroutine is called. By definition, local variables are only present or available in local values, if that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, just maybe expand clarify your question. If you're referring to local, what are you referring to? So you want to know whether a subroutine can access a variable within the function it is being called. Is that what you're actually asking? Is that your question? I'm assuming that's your question. Okay, so a subroutine itself is a function on its own. So generally, what happens is it goes to that function and then it calls that function without it being referred to. So if you have a function, for instance, I'll be doing this function now. If you call this function inside the place results, so let's say let's do divide by d, and we give it 2, 3, 4. This function will not be able to access variables inside this function because they're independent. Even though this function's initialization starts over there, this function cannot access variables inside this function. It's kind of a weird way of looking at it, but the function itself, if you declare a local variable inside this function, it only lives inside that function. So when you return a value, that is the output going back to that program. So you can kind of see it like a declaration where the initialization and the destruction of that declaration starts and ends there. The easiest way to answer your question is go and try it out, and you'll see it's not possible. But the more technical answer is basically the local definition of a local variable is that it's only present inside that local function. And it only survives in that function itself. It doesn't survive inside internal functions, unless you refer to it by value inside a function parameter call, as we're doing in this case. Where was I? Yes, I'll return. Okay. And then we just need to calculate our lockdown. So in this case, what we need to do is we need to calculate what the lockdown level would be for each of our provinces, assuming that we take the worst case or the worst metro index as the determining factor for our lockdown. So for each province, I do apologize for going slightly over time here. All right. So in this case, yes, it's an example of the by ref representation. So instead of having a return, which actively returns our value, we're going to have the actual result inside our parameter itself. I'll show you how that works in a second. Where am I now? Lost track again. Oh yeah, the lockdown level. Right. So for the lockdown level, we need to set up our result. And our result should be a double. And this will be the lockdown result that we want. So we need to calculate what is our actual value. So the first thing we need to do is we need to determine our province. Population, which is the population Come on, why are you not playing nice with me? So the population multiplied by a million, 1, 2, 3. The divider, which is the index that we want to use, which is now the metro with the worst index. Total cases of that index, and then the result. So what's happening here is instead of saying, oh, wait, I'm making a mistake. So instead of saying result equals and then calling the divide by function and then putting the variables in there, we are telling it to put the results, the actual value inside the parameter itself. So we've got our dividend, we've got our divisor, and we've got our result. Now, result, what will happen is because it's by ref, it will alter the value of that reference. So we're sending the actual parameter or the variable inside the parameter, and then that value is now being used inside the subroutine. So that question about using a variable inside a or using a local variable inside a function, that is essentially how you do it, is you send it inside the parameter of your function by reference. That's the only way that you can access a local variable. So what it's doing, it's basically changing that result or changing that value, and then because it's a bind rev value, we now have access to that value. If that makes sense. I'm hoping that makes sense. All right. I don't want to make it too confusing, but then again, I don't want to speed line through everything and you not understand it as well. All right. Then we need to do our select cases here. So we just simply go, come on, play nice. I'll select case, close my parameter at the top. We'll select case result, and then we just want to test each one of our cases. We want to see whether this case is less than 0.5, which case provinces E dot block level will be 1. The other case we want to test is to see if case is in the range of 0.5 to 0.6. And then our last case we want to test is to see if our cases is larger than 0.6. That would put provinces PS lockdown 2.3. Right. And then after this, we can just place our results, put our displays back into our table so that we can see what the actual lockdown level would be for each one of our provinces. Okay, that should be close bracket. There we go. So that is now calculating our ratio, taking the ratio, checking which lockdown level, and then placing the result into our grid as we have. And now just for the last one just determining what is the overall average lockdown level for all the provinces. So in this case, we are going to have a total that spans over the other provinces. So we do want a variable over here. This is an integer. Because lockdown levels are 1, 2, and 3, and there's no decimal values there, we can keep this as an integer, but the average itself will have to be a double because when you divide, the result will always be a double data type, even though it might end in a integer data type, but the potential for double is there, so that's why you store it as double. All right. For each province, you just want to go to an province. You want to calculate our total. We'll just use the shorthand over here. It makes things look neater using the shorthand in any case. And then we just want to keep lockdown level here. And then when we're done, we just want our average. And our average is just our total divided. Why are you being so mean to me now? Total divided by our number of provinces. And there we have it. Then all we have to do is just place our value. And we are done. No, I'm making a mistake. Why am I making a mistake? What's the mistake here? Yes, format. Forgot to do that. So you want to make sure you format the output itself. So this format is going to give us everybody still there? I see my screen just went blank for a second. So we've got our average, and then we just provide it with the format. And there we go. We are done. So save. Make sure you save incrementally, not just at the end like now. And then test to see if it all works. So let's just do something small. We've got 3 provinces, 2 metros. We'll track it over 2 days. We'll go Prof 1, population of 12 mil. We've got Metro 1. We've got 12 days, 13 days. We've got Metro 2. We've got 10. It will work. I just want to show that it works. Just made the mistake of, okay, Metro population 12, name 1, 2, name 1, 2. Second populations will be 14, Metro 1, 13, 14, Metro 2. Also just realized something there, which I'll discuss with you in a second. Another mistake that I made. Population, let's say 15. Metro 1, 12, 15, Metro 2, 17, 18. Okay, so calculate. So we've got the averages. This is now the total number of days here. We calculate our index of the current highest metro. So for province 1, Metro 1 was the worst. For province 2, Metro 2 was the worst. For province 3, Metro 2 was the worst. It's just my naming made it a bit of a mix match, I guess. Determine the lockdown levels. Another issue. You see the lockdown levels overrode over here and not over here, which means that I made a mistake of not adding +2 to our lockdown description. So lockdown, if you go down here, it means over here I should have said +2. But we can see the index, the lockdown level is correct, however. And then we calculate the overall average, which is 3, which we can see is true over here. But we can now see, because it's not placing the results there, that we made a mistake in that specific line of code. Right. So that's why it's important to test, because we can just easily fix that question and the program works perfectly. Right. So something to take away from this is, one, you can see a design is very important. Another thing you might not have seen that actually was also a bit of an oopsie because I did not do the design. You see over here where I place the metro names inside the grid. Biggest issue with that right now is, remember we're giving each province and each metro a name? If Metro 1 of the very last province is whatever the name is will be that metro name that's displayed inside the title of our grid. And that is technically not correct. We've got multiple provinces with multiple metros, and Metro 1 and all of these provinces are not going to have the same name. So we can't actually place that result inside our grid. All right. So that's also one thing I only saw now once I ran the code and realized every time you type this, it's going to change the value. So it's only the province names that you can actually override once you capture the information. Once again, something that you'll realize once you do your design and go into code, because now you realize what names are going where inside your grid because it's pre-planned. And that's why it's important to do as a design. All right. There are a few syntax things that we discussed. Once again, if you have any issues with syntax, you can just ask us what our preferences are. Apparently, we'll put in the mark sheet what is absolutely important. And if it's not absolutely important and it's not a bad programming practice, then we really don't mind if you do it. If we tell you not to do it, then we'll subtract marks. So always just keep that in mind as well. Right. Now, I do apologize. I went slightly over our time. I'll make sure to not go over time next week. But because we did an entire semester basically in one session, it was guaranteed to go over time. So I do apologize for that. But I hope you guys followed. I hope I didn't confuse you too much. Maybe just drop a comment if I went too fast, too slow, too technical, not technical enough, and where you think I should have done something differently that would have made you better understand it. All right. Other than that, I hope you guys have a lovely evening, and we'll see you tomorrow in our lecture. I will stick around for a while if you want to make any last comments. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow.